Okay, well, thanks so much for the invitation. It's really an honor to be presenting here. This is a project we've been actively working on, as I was saying, but I guess before the recording, and we're not yet done with it. So today I'm going to actually show off some new results for the first time that no one's seen before, as well as some old results. So it's kind of a mix of new and old. Any feedback is very welcome. All reactions would be helpful. So this is joint with Dort and Jack. They're really incredible co-authors. And the question we're interested in this project is why information still seems to have staying power even after it's been retracted. So in case the premise of that question is something you haven't thought about before, there's many examples where retractions don't seem to be as effective as they should be, or at the very least, as effective as we would like them to be. So perhaps the most famous example of this was a study published in the 90s claiming to find a connection between vaccines and autism, published in The Lancet, retracted in 2010. Nevertheless, many people still believe in an association between the two, citing the original study being completely aware of the retraction. Um, that's obviously a lot of special circumstances around that example, but also in political settings, you often will find politicians making some claim about something happening in the world. Later, it'll be fact-checked, and the politician may even recant what they say. Nevertheless, you have a lot of people who still, believe in the um, and the claim of the politician. And I could go on. There's other examples. I think if I talked about all of these examples, I wouldn't have any time to talk about anything else. So, in fact, we're not the first people to point this out. There's a literature in psychology where they call this idea that information can have a persistent impact even after it's been discredited as the continued influence effect. So one of the early studies on this was a paper by Johnson and Seifert. In their case, they asked subject about the cause of a warehouse fire. So they gave subjects news articles about, saying first there were hazardous materials in a closet, later saying that that was incorrect, and found that many people still used that information when recounting what caused the fire later. And so that was obviously a while ago. And since then, there's been a lot of work on this. And there's a lot of different explanations that have been proposed. So the existing explanations can focus on, for instance, the importance of dislodging narratives. So, if I give you a narrative and I don't give you a counter narrative, as a retraction might be, then that might be a reason why you don't internalize the retraction. Perhaps there's frictions with memory. So maybe I don't remember this initial source that caused me to have my belief currently. And so if you retract that source, then then it doesn't really change anything. Perhaps I, don't like admitting I was wrong. And so if I get the retraction, then I have to admit that my initial information, my belief was wrong. And if I don't like doing that, then I might not, my beliefs might not change in response to the retraction. And so what I want to point out is that these are all explanations that, I'm not going to, criticize any of them. But I will say that they apply to some retractions more than others. In some cases, you might have memory might be important. In other cases, it's less clear, why memory would be significant. And I think the same would go for these other explanations. So with that background, there are discussion is going to raise 3 points, which is going to motivate our work. So the first point is that while I might have primed you into thinking that you should think that this is irrational or a bias, it's not actually entirely clear a priori that these patterns are inconsistent with how at least economists might understand rationality. So an easy reason to see why retractions might not work is that it could be that there's just no information in the retraction, right? If some information is retracted because there's a procedural issue, it's not really about the information content itself, then yeah, I shouldn't react to the retraction. So that's obviously a little bit of an extreme case, but in fact, it's often a lot more subtle than this. So Pennycook, Rand, and co-authors make this point that if I'm, if I'm not clear about how I'm generating information that I'm correcting, then it actually may be very well the case that I should underreact to this. That if I'm giving fact checks and I'm only fact checking the things that are wrong, then actually then people may rationally under infer from that. So I'm going to make a related point to that in our design, but that's just to say that. So I'll come back to that latter point, but that's just to say that it's not entirely clear that you should take it for granted that this is something that we should expect to find. Okay, so the second point is that even if this is something that is a mistake, it's not entirely clear how this should fit within the taxonomy of mistakes that we already know and understand. So for instance, it might be, it could be that information forces me to have some informed belief. And then the retraction is going to make me need to go again, update beliefs in the opposite direction. And so if that's the case, then we know already from the literature on confirmation bias that people generally update less when information is against their priors. And so you might not, you might look at all of these examples and say, well, yes, we already know all this because this is just an example of confirmation bias. And with that in the background, even if there is some departure, even if it is something different, there's a lot of differences that we're going to have, and that could lead to departures from rational updating. And so it might be that it's just there's other errors that are in the background that are kind of more important, and so maybe it's not actually that significant. Okay, and so on the other extreme, even if you grant me that this is irrational or not inconsistent with how with rational belief formation, and even if you grant me that it is a different thing, that now you kind of have the opposite problem, which is that it's not entirely clear that I should think about all of these patterns I talked about using a unified framework. So I want to be very clear that in this talk, and I'm not saying anything about how psychologists would think about this, but just for me, I think of continued influence as a pattern with many suggested origins. So the idea is that the idea that retracted information continues to have persistent influence, that is a pattern which has many different manifestations and could correspondingly have many different origins. So if you think that any bias as it relates to one domain is the thing that generates this pattern is specific to how I process information about health, then that might be a very different thing than how I process information about politics. And so our motivation is going to try to have some unified framework to think about retraction. So what we're going to do today is ask, what is the most fundamental issue that drives retraction ineffectiveness? Can I find one explanation or one way of thinking about retraction ineffectiveness that applies to belief formation itself, and is really tied to that fundamental mechanism that would apply to whenever you have some kind of retraction, that it's really about the nature of the retraction itself. And so the way we're going to do that is we're going to be presenting a ball and earns implementation of retractions. So what's nice about this ball and earn setting is that we have access to objective probabilities. So what that's going to mean is that I'm going to have a precise way of saying how much subjects should update, having access to what would be implied by Bayes' rule. So what we're going to do is we're going to compare how people update following retractions, or their beliefs following retractions, to two other beliefs that they'll hold. The first being, what would their belief had been had they gotten another signal that was not a retraction, but should have had the same impact? And also versus the beliefs they would have had they never seen that retracted information in the first place. Okay, and so this is going to help us avoid this question of not knowing how much beliefs should move. We're going to know how much beliefs should move because we have access to Bayes' rule. And then the second point is that we're going to, and so, we like this design because it's as direct a test of belief formation as I can come up with. I'm really interested in isolating the information processing mechanisms. And for that, I want to have a design that really is very much as close to what I would understand as a rational, economic model as I can get. And that's what this design really is. So that we're not the only people to have that motivation. So Iceland presented in the seminar in the fall, and they also used a similar design with I think a similar motivation. And in so doing, we're going to be able to replicate a lot of findings from the literature, which is always nice, that we can show that our patterns are actually consistent with what other people have found. And it's true that in some sense, this is something that also involves some context. I think that's unavoidable. Any experiment you would do, any situation you would look at is going to have some kind of context. I would argue that our context is minimal in the sense that, if I'm asking you beliefs about some event, perhaps it's true that the fact that I'm showing you a yellow ball is going to be clouding your judgment, probably less than asking you about if Trump is guilty or something like that. Now, even if you don't believe me, even if you think this is kind of a weird setting, I will say that the design does lend itself to manipulations more than perhaps other designs might. And we're also going to have access to some extra variables or more variables which are that we're gonna be able to collect in order to determine, in order to try to really hone in on the different mechanisms. So there's basically two parts to the paper. So the first part is to actually document retraction failures. You might have thought perhaps this is such a stripped down setting. Do we actually find something that might look like in a retraction and effectiveness? And we do. So the retractions, what we find is that, first of all, according to either of these comparisons, retractions are not going to undo the impact of the retracted signal. So we are going to find this staying power. And we are also going to find that the retractions are going to move beliefs less than the equivalent new information. Okay, so as I said, we have this equivalence, and the retractions are going to move beliefs, less than they should according to this equivalence. How much less? Just under 1/2. Now, this is something that kind of changes a little bit depending on, how you cut the data. So I don't kind of want to. Yeah, but sometimes it's more than that, sometimes it's less than that. Overall, in what I'll present you today for our benchmark, it's just less than half. So good. So we have this finding. So we do actually we do show that we get this in our setting. And the second part is to show that this is to try to propose a mechanism related to how people update, in particular, the cognitive effort associated with retractions. So we're going to be piggybacking on a literature that has pointed out that often people find it harder to update following contingencies, and that this kind of contingent updating is often a source of added difficulty for people. And I'm going to tell you why we sort of think that is the case here. That in our case, we're pointing out that retractions are information about, not directly related to what we're asking you about, but related to something you saw in the past. And that's going to add an extra layer of reasoning, and we're going to propose that as a reason for why it's fundamentally more complex. That any retraction you give, it's because I'm asking you to update about something you saw in the past, and the fact that that's one step removed from the actual state is going to be a source of added complexity. Now, in order to make this point, to say that this is the case, what I should do is I should try to find some measures of complexity and see if I can determine that they are in fact also changing together with the between retractions and new signals, and we do in fact find that. So in the second part of the talk, we have all these different complexity measures, and then we find patterns that are consistent with higher cognitive effort associated with interpreting retractions. We also find that we also manipulate the design, and so these manipulations are sort of trying to get at the fact that trying to get at showing that if we have a relative difference in complexity changing, do we also get a relative change in the effect? And the goal here, so what's the broader point? What we're really trying to do, the agenda that we're part of, or that we think we're part of, is trying to draw analogies between these findings of continued influence and these errors in probabilistic reasoning that are due to complexity. And so the latter has been a very active topic of research in economics, showing how do complexity considerations influence how people form beliefs. And we're going to, basically make this point within the context of continued influence. And that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to say complexity plays a role in belief updating. And in particular, it's something that can generate this pattern of continued influence. So good. So that's my outline. We're going to first, I'll tell you about the design. After I go through the design, I'll walk through these comparisons of interests. Then I will document. I'll show you what we have for documenting these retraction failures, and then I'll turn to what we have to say about complexity. So this was a task. So we asked subjects about the composition of a box. The box had 5 balls in it, 4 of which we called noise balls, which were 2 yellow and 2 blue. And one of which was the truth ball, which was equally likely to be yellow or blue. Okay, and so what we were asking subjects about was, what is the color of the truth ball? And we would give them information, and then we would ask them their beliefs. Okay, and so I'll tell you about the information in a second. When we were asking them their beliefs, they would make a report. They would use a slider to make their report. We used a binarized scoring rule to make this strictly incentive compatible. If you're not familiar with it, it's a little bit strange the first time you've seen it. And we thought subjects might find that as well. It seemed like the least controversial thing to do at the time. It was, it certainly that was kind of the standard when we started this. We didn't really think that really mattered, so we did not try to attempt to describe the details of it. We did let them click, so we basically said something like, you should, it's in your best interest to tell us what you think, and then if they wanted to click and see more, they could sort of see this explanation with these calculations. But for the most part, that wasn't that important. So good. So we would start. So the experiment was divided into different rounds, where in each round we would draw a truth ball, the truth ball anew. Okay, and so then in each period we would give subjects information. So and the information could be of one of two kinds. So the first kind was a new draw. And it would look something like this. So we would basically sample from the box with replacement and then show the subjects the color of the ball. So here you can see we represented this ball being drawn from the box. We put an arrow up to kind of represent it being taken. We would show subjects the history of what they've seen. And whenever they didn't see whether it's a truth ball or a noise ball, we would have a question mark to represent that they don't know what it is. Okay, and so this is for this subject, or I think actually this was a screenshot from the instructions. And so if this was what they would see, then this reflects having two yellow balls and a blue ball. And so we always would provide new draws in periods 1 and period 2. In period 3 and period 4, each independently we would provide a different kind of signal. So period 1 and period 2, they're always getting new draws. Period 3, with probability 0.5, they get a new draw. With probability 0.5, after that, independently, they get another new draw. So the second kind of signal that they would get was a retraction. Okay, and this is what a retraction would look like. So what we would do is we would select one of the balls uniformly at random and reveal whether that ball was noise or truth. And so we would provide this in periods 3 and period 4 with equal probability. So the way we would generate this is we would first, as I said, we would draw one of the balls uniformly at random. We would then, have an arrow pointing to it, and this would say this is a noise ball. We would change the question mark to an N, and then we would draw a line over the noise ball, just to be clear that it's that this is the thing that is being revealed. Now, if you might have noticed, well, I sort of said if we're kind of selecting the ball uniformly at random and then telling them whether it's truth or noise, and you might have thought, well, how can you ensure that that's actually that they're always getting noise? We can't, and we didn't. And so in principle, this implementation, which we call verifying retractions, by the way, because because this is verifying whether the ball is truth or noise. So in principle, sometimes we have to show them the truth ball. For the most part, we don't use these reports. We do some robustness checks with them, so we can use it to see if subjects are paying attention, whether they understand. But for and in some other, it turns out to be useful in a couple of different ways. But for the most part, this isn't something that we have much to say about. Okay. So that was the basic task. So we ran 6 different versions of this across 4 different experiments. And as I said, some of these are no one has seen some of these experiments before, so you guys are all very lucky, I think. So subjects did 32 rounds. Every time we did this, they would do 32 rounds with being asked about the instructions in the middle. So the vanilla, so the most basic version is what I described for you. That's most of what I'm going to talk about today. The vast majority of what I'll talk about is just for this the main version. We did this on MTurk, and that involved 211 subjects, and it took them about 31 minutes on average. We also had some incentivized quantitative questions, just testing their math ability to kind of see if we could control for that. We also had just non-incentivized questions in order to try to figure out who they were. And And so we collected that data as well. Now, we did a lot of follow-ons. So, and at some point while we were doing follow-ons, we switched to prolific. And we were a bit worried when we were doing prolific, when we started on prolific, that was going to change everything, and that we wouldn't know how to interpret any of our results. So we ended up just doing a direct replication of this. So we actually ran this experiment twice, once on mTurk, once on prolific, and we were actually kind of shocked about how closely everything replicated. I mean, I'll show you this later, but basically we got almost exactly the same results.
Hang on. Why were you shocked?
I I mean, I've never tried to do like an exact replication, but you'll see the results. It's like very close. It's very, very close. And I thought we had more error. I thought there was just more noise in what we were doing. Yeah, but it was like it was quite close. And also because I mean, I guess maybe a lot of people had been skeptical of mTurk, and so maybe there was some kind of residual yeah, maybe mTurk was everything,
Okay, I see. Yeah.
yeah, but so I'll show you just how, yeah, you'll see. So overall, if you kind of add up everything we did, our subject pool was a little over 1,200. So one thing I want to say is that it's we would have to subjects would have to answer comprehension questions after they would read the instructions, and it seemed that subjects actually did understand the task pretty well. So in every experiment, each of the 4 times we did this, so most of the time subjects would answer everything correctly on the first take, which yeah, which is pretty which seemed pretty good. Almost the vast majority, if they made a mistake, they would get it right on the second time. To be honest, I didn't think doing it 100% correctly was necessarily easy. Because the instructions are kind of long, and maybe you just kind of forget something. And if you think about subjects just kind of trying to finish everything as quickly as possible, the probability that they would get everything right if they were just guessing is 1%. Okay, so it seems that subjects did, for the most part, understand what we were asking them. Now we try a lot to get at that even further, and so we have we in some of the extensions, I don't know how much time I'll have to talk about it, but we do kind of look at like, okay, if we cut the data based on how they do on these comprehension questions, what happens to the effect. We also ran other treatments that were specifically designed to get at this, and so we hope to make the point that it's not just people didn't understand what we were asking them, or that there was some kind of misinterpretation of the information generating process. Okay, so that's sort of that's what we did. And so what are the comparisons we're going to look at? So, to say that if I were to tell you that retractions aren't effective because people don't know how to do Bayes rule, I mean, that wouldn't be that compelling to me, because it's kind of crazy to insist that people know how to do Bayes rule, especially in this kind of pure math setting. But if I want to say that retractions should be treated differently, that's a much weaker claim, and it shouldn't necessarily rely on that. So so we can make these comparisons precise under the assumption that that subjects don't necessarily form Bayes rule, but do follow Bayes rule up to a transformation. And so this is an assumption that has been made in other experimental papers as well. We kind of borrow this terminology from Cripps, which calls a decision maker a quasi-Bayesian if they are Bayesian up to a transformation. Okay, so if I have a strictly increasing function which maps my objective probabilities to the subjective beliefs, then I'll say that you're a quasi. So you'll be a quasi-Bayesian if given this function. I can compute your belief updates by first inverting it to map the subjective beliefs into the objective beliefs. I can apply Bayes rule to the objective beliefs. And then I can recompose it with this function to find this transformation. Okay, so as long as you're Bayesian up to this transformation, it's fine if you're not Bayesian. But in this case, anyone who as long as it's these beliefs determine the objective beliefs determine their subjective beliefs, as long as that's the case, I should have these equivalences that I need. Okay, and so this is our one kind of theoretical, like purely true theoretical result of the paper, that as long as you're a quasi-Bayesian, you should update the same if I give you a retraction of a signal, as opposed to what your beliefs would have been had you never seen that retracted signal in the first place. And furthermore, that both of those should be the same as if I were to give you a new signal of the opposite color to the retracted signal. Okay, so retracting a yellow should be the same as giving you a new draw blue. Okay, and so in pictures, what this proposition is saying is that we can do this comparison. So we can compare, the beliefs following the retraction of a yellow ball. So if I retract this noise ball, I can compare your beliefs there to what they would be had you never seen that yellow ball in the first place. Okay. And the second comparison is going to be, well, comparing the retraction to what your beliefs would have been had you gotten a new draw that was not a retraction. Okay, another signal that was not a retraction, but should move your beliefs in the same way. So do people update the same way if I have this noise ball versus if I give you another blue ball? Okay, so that's what we're gonna be looking at, and so those are what we're gonna be doing. Now, before I get there, I just want to point out that this is an experiment that, if I didn't have retractions, this would be a very standard ball and earn experiment, and this has been run, variations of this have been run many, many times. And overall, I think if you look at the data just from those draws, you end up getting things that look very similar to what the literature has found in the past. So for this picture, what we do is we treat, if you get a blue ball in the first period instead of a yellow ball, we kind of look at 1 minus your belief reports instead of your belief reports. So we just flip everything around in the case around the first draw in order just to avoid having too many of these different lines here. And what we see is that overall the belief updating patterns look actually like quite good. I mean, I don't like laughing at these subjects for, oh, you can't do this probability test. Actually, I think they do quite well. So, in terms of if you look at these belief reports, if you move from Y to YY, people are updating in the right direction. Okay, so typically, Y signals are good news, B signals are bad. I mean, the Y signals move you up, B signals move you down. And also they're pretty close to the Bayesian posterior. So so the green line the green line is what the Bayesian posteriors, the purple line is what they report. And so overall, they don't seem to actually be that far off on average. That said, they are off. I mean, they are getting it wrong. These lines tend to be a little bit below below what the report should be, and they often don't actually include the correct beliefs. Okay, but I'll come back to this, and so we'll talk more about the underlying belief patterns later in comparison to retractions, but this is just to hopefully, convince you that we're not finding anything too unusual in terms of just looking for from just the belief reports themselves. Okay, so for presenting retraction now I want to talk about how are beliefs different from retractions versus new draws. And so the nice thing about a design is that we have these very simple comparisons. There isn't anything like super complicated in order to understand like what is this effect. The comparisons are very direct. The Bayesian probability should be the same, and so we want to leverage that simplicity in order to try to get at this question. The disadvantage of our design is that there's a lot of different histories. There's a lot of, 2 to the 4 different signals, and then you might get a retraction. It's a lot. It's a lot that we could try to compare. And so the way I want to talk about this is first I want to give you semi-disaggregated results. Then I will aggregate them. And then I'll kind of disaggregate them again once we in order to disentangle it with other biases. And so part of the reason I want to aggregate them is because if I want to look at other manipulations, and then I want to see like, does the effect go up or down under these different manipulations? And for that, I kind of have to have one number that I'm looking at. So good. So the way I'm going to present these results at first is I'm going to group histories that have the same belief. I shouldn't say terminal. I should just say belief. So your Bayesian. So I'm going to show you the belief whenever I'm going to show you all the histories where the subject should have the same Bayesian belief. And so that means that if you're looking at a period 3 belief, then you'll either have 2 draws in favor of one state and 1 draw in favor of the other, or vice versa. If you're looking at a period 4 belief, you'll either have 3 versus 1, 2 versus 2, or 1 versus 3, in terms of signals favoring one state versus the other. I can't give you 3 versus 0 because retractions are inherently, by their definition, it has to be in the other direction. So if I have any comparison, you have to have seen, both kinds of signals. If you've only seen yellow signals, then there's no way you've seen retraction. I can't retract a signal I've never showed you. So what I'm gonna group these different these reports based on the Bayesian belief they should have. And then I'm going to ask, how far are these beliefs off from the Bayesian belief? So we expect them to be different. I've already showed you that they should be different. The key question is, how does this difference depend on the kind of information? Good. So we're still, I should say we've played around a lot with how to present this main finding, and we're still thinking about it. So any thoughts are very welcome. And this is what we get for that comparison. So how should you interpret this? What should you make of this plot? So the bolded lines are the belief reports following retractions, and the shaded lines are the beliefs reports following new draws. And so the first observation is that when people are making an error, they tend to be in the direction of the signal. So we already saw that there's some kind of conservatism, that beliefs are kind of a little bit below what the Bayesian belief should be. And what that kind of means is that in this case, if you get the that in terms of the equivalent signal, if you're getting a yellow signal, your beliefs haven't updated enough, right? If yellow, thinking if the probability of one thing corresponds to the state being yellow, and you get a yellow draw, then you get a yellow draw, your beliefs aren't going to be quite high enough. And vice versa for blue draws. Okay, so the errors that we see overall, they tend to be in the direction of signals. So the yellows are generally above the line, the blue are generally below the line or very close to the 0 line. However, if you look at the errors for retractions, it's almost uniformly higher. Okay, for almost all of these different groups, we have higher errors, even more errors in the direction for retraction. So while the errors so while people kind of don't update, aren't moving close enough to what the Bayesian belief should be, they're moving even less towards the Bayesian beliefs for the retraction. So you can kind of see not for all except this last one on the right, we have a pretty notable difference in terms of how much higher the bars are kind of uniformly higher for the retraction. Johnny.
This is very interesting. I just wanted, so signals are all with replacements.
Yes.
Yeah, and that's the result on the equivalence relies on it being with replacement. I was just thinking there is a difference. If you've got 4 signals already, then without replacement, that 5th one will surely give you the results. You do get this information asymmetry between a retraction and
very good. Yes, we would get that. We thought about that. We did look at what the results would be if so in what you just said, if that's what I thought, then I should believe with probability 1 that the truth I should think I know the truth ball if I've seen 3 draws of the same kind. And we can look at, what if we restrict to subjects who don't do that? And we find an even stronger effect. So I think actually that updating pattern would imply a stronger belief update for retractions. If I'm remembering correctly, I might be wrong about that, but I think when we thought about this, which kind of makes sense if I've seen like,
So I just want, it's just a more of a comment than a question, I guess.
No. We thought about that, and it makes our results stronger if I kind of restrict to people who don't do that.
Jonathan, maybe I misunderstood part of your design, but when you tell them that the signal is that they drew a noisy signal in the retraction case, you tell them that after some delay.
So they're doing the experiment quite fast, typically. I
Like
think in this, I think we did have a delay. I think we would make. I could be wrong about that, and it's possible that we did that in one and not the other. But
but it seems like one obvious control. Maybe I'm misunderstanding, and you already have this control. Is just whether I tell you the information that it's a noisy signal at the same time, or I tell you it later.
okay, very good. We did not do that. Part of the reason we didn't do that is because that seemed very similar to what if I'm just retracting the last draw that you saw. And that's something we did and we actually talk a lot about. So in other words, if I give you like, if I have, yellow, yellow, blue, and then I retract that last blue, that sort of seems similar to just telling you the noise
Similar,
immediately.
except like my comparison allows you to control for they just don't understand what a noisy signal is.
Okay, so we will hopefully show you that they do. We have a treatment where we kind of tell them that what a noisy signal should mean. And it didn't do anything. So we had other ways of getting at that.
But you are confident that if you told me this is a noisy signal right away, that I would just ignore it.
I'm actually not. I don't think you need to be for a lot of the a lot of the comparisons, but I think that if we look, I'll show you the stuff when you retract the last draw, and for that, actually, based on those results, I hopefully that's convincing you that any kind of difference would certainly be small relative to what we find, because for that case we actually find much less of an effect when we look at the retracting the last draw. That was sort of our part of why we didn't, when we were thinking about follow-ons, we thought about that one actually, but we already had that there's like kind of less of an effect for the last draw, and so that was kind of yeah, that was sort of the reason. But very good. Okay, so good. So great. So now I want to talk about how large this effect is. So I want to kind of, say, okay, I've showed you these pictures, but what is it on average? Like how should you interpret this? Is this large? Is this small? And so in order to aggregate, there's two issues I have to deal with. So the first is that, the how much you update from a retraction at an extreme belief is going to be different from how you update from a retraction at a moderate belief. If you've seen 100 yellow balls and you get another yellow ball, your beliefs probably aren't going to move quite as much. If you haven't seen anything, then maybe it'll move more. So these different histories, the magnitudes of the updates should be different. And second, I'm going to have to group these different histories together. So to deal with the first issue, to deal with this fact that you have these different magnitudes, we can use the following identity that if I look at the log odds of the belief reports, that these should be a constant, that the log odds should be constant no matter what your prior belief is, that you should the log odds should update by some fixed amount for each kind of signal. And so this is kind of a standard trick. We're not the first to think about this. There's advantages and disadvantages to both. For the most part, it doesn't make a difference. We look at the effect in levels too. I mean, what I just showed you was just in the levels. But today I'm going to focus on log odds because it's just a little bit simpler, so I can compare these different beliefs. Okay, and so that's sort of the easy one to just say, let's just look at log odds. And now if you are updating after you've seen 2 signals versus after you've seen no signals, that's kind of the easy case. The harder case is how do we group these different histories together? And so this is so to do this and to make sure that we look at the right comparisons, we use particular fixed effects. So when I look at so these two different kinds of fixed effects are going to make sure I restrict the histories that I control for the history that should be equivalent. Okay, so that I can look at the difference between these grouped histories. Okay. So how does this work? So the compressed history is going to say, let me treat a history as equivalent after the retraction. So I've given you the retraction, and then I'm deleting I'm looking at what your belief would have been with a deleted signal, and I'm going to treat those two as I'm going to treat those two as the same, and then yeah, and so you know, that's using kind of the first equivalence, that whether your beliefs, you know, if treating those, you know, so adding this fixed effect is going to make sure that I'm, yeah, basically grouping these histories together and treating them as these should, you should have the same belief report. And for the lagged history, I'm going to be grouping the history after the retraction with what if you'd gotten the opposite signal. Okay, so that's, so the first compressed history is looking at comparisons to the prior. Compressed history is looking at comparisons to lagged history. Compressed history is to the prior, lagged history is to the new draw. So let me give you an example. So just to kind of illustrate how this works. So if we had this signal blue, yellow, blue, and then I was retracting the blue, I would be grouping this with for the compressed history. I would be thinking, okay, I'm retracting a blue draw. This should be the same as blue, yellow. Okay, so with the blue, yellow, yeah, that's sort of the yeah, that's sort of the compressed history. The compressed history is saying, okay, let's imagine the histories are the same if you look at, you know, period 2 versus period 4, right? For this history, just what, you know, the beliefs. Let me just delete the blue draw that you saw that I'm retracting. For the lagged history, I want to group blue, yellow, blue with yeah, I'll look at blue, yellow, blue, and that's going to group blue, yellow, yellow with blue, yellow, blue, blue retracted. Okay. And so, you know, this is like a little incomplete because now I'm going to add dummy variables. And so the dummy variables are going to capture the differences between the different kinds of information. So these fixed effects are grouping lots of different kinds of histories with different kinds of information. But the idea is that when I add a dummy to my regression equation, the dummy is going to be 1 when something's a retraction. And so that's going to be picking up the difference in the belief reports due to something being a retraction. Okay, so once I have these controls, this compressed history is going to give me the difference in the belief when something's a retraction in period 2 versus period 4. With the lagged history, that's going to give these other controls, the difference is going to be the period 4 signal versus the period 4 retraction. The period 4 new signal with a period 4 retraction. Okay, so that's all I need to aggregate. And so once you do that, this is what you get. So as you can see, you know, we have 3 stars, but how should you interpret this 0.586? Well, so 0.586 is a coefficient on the log odds update, okay? And so this is the change in log odds. But okay, the difference in the change in log odds when something's a retraction. How should you interpret this? So our idea is you should interpret this relative to how much the log odds update for new draws. Okay, so if I just given you a new draw, you would have some log odds update. This is the difference in how much you update when something's a retraction. Okay, and so overall, if we were to just say what's the estimated coefficient for the log odds update, it would be approximately 1.08. Okay, and so when you get a retraction, then your belief is less by a factor of 0.586. Less the change in the log odds update is 0.586 for without the retraction. For the equivalent new draw, it's approximately 0.6. And so if you divide what I've kind of highlighted in red by 1.08, that's where I'm getting this beliefs are moving by roughly half as much as they should. You know, the belief update when you get a new draw is approximately 1.08. But if that's kind of the benchmark and how much the update should be, this is saying that the belief is moving by a little bit less than half as much as it should. As a sanity check, you can see retractions by themselves don't have any notable impact, which is, you know, what you would expect because the retraction is not kind of favorable. The fact that I'm giving you a retraction is not favorable for one state or the other. Good. So okay, so this is kind of the main finding. This is our main summary statistic for how much we can benchmark it. For a lot of what I'm going to show, we can visualize these treatment effects as follows. Okay, so here I have the green line, the green square with the bars around it is how much you're updating from new draws. Okay, so this is just the new draw updating. And the treatment effects are the ones that are either blue or yellow. And so, to help interpret this, if we had no effect, if retractions really were treated the same way as new draws, or they really did move beliefs back to the prior, we should have both of these being including zero, right? Zero should be overlapping with both of these treatment effects. Now, and so, the fact that they're not is reflecting this kind of the fact that we have statistical significance, is what I said on the last slide. Now, on the other hand, on the flip side, if retractions just didn't move beliefs at all, if they were completely ineffective, then we would have these blue and orange lines would be coinciding with the green, right? If you're moving by some amount and you're not moving at all, then the difference should kind of completely wipe out the effect of updating from new draws. Okay, and so this is this is kind of a visual representation of what we have. You can see that retractions they are different because they don't include zero, and they're roughly halfway between the green line and zero, or the green box and zero. So they're the difference. How much less do you update for retractions? It's about half as much as you would otherwise. Now this is kind of coming back to my the point that Jonathan was making about why was I so surprised. So here was I've kind of slipped in the fact that we ran this twice, and you can see the left hand side is this kind of baseline overall, like what happens if we aggregate everything, and here I've kind of split things by mTurk versus prolific, and this was just very, very, very close. These very small difference moving from almost indistinguishable point estimates, moving from one platform to the other, which is to me very reassuring. So anyways, that was sort of the point, that we running literally the same thing twice, we get almost the exact same estimates. So that gives us some, which perhaps isn't too surprising because we did have a lot of subjects, but
Jonathan, did you ask your subjects why they're not updating more after the retraction?
We didn't. In some of the versions, we had some mechanism for unstructured feedback. I don't think it really led anything. We didn't ask about that specifically. Yeah, I don't know.
Do you think that they're aware that they're doing that?
No, so we actually have some pretty strong evidence that they are not aware. I mean, So, okay, so in the last version we ran, we asked them about confidence. We asked them, how confident are you about your reports? And we were a little surprised that they were equally confident, that they didn't seem to perceive any difference from the retraction versus the new draw. And we had a hard time, spent a long time thinking, like, what do we make of that result? All I can say is that we don't think, that was sort of the closest thing I have to answer your question, is just that it seems that they actually don't, as far as we were able to tell, they don't really perceive it as any different. Just based on that alone. Okay, so now what I want to do is I want to compare this to other biases. So I want to look at what happens with these. What would how do I compare the effect we find with what you would find from, let's say, confirmation bias or other things. So here I've already kind of talked about this log odds regression, and so we're going to use this full regression with more kind of coefficients added depending on which history they're at. So if you look at this regression equation, you'll see that, well, if the subject's a Bayesian, based on the log odds update I had before, you should have beta 0 and beta 2 equal to 0, and beta 1 and beta 3 should be equal to 1. And so if you have base rate neglect, then both of these coefficients, the coefficients on the log odds update and the prior, should be both less than 1. And you shouldn't have anything, you shouldn't just inherently update in one direction or the other. these regressions are very commonly used as a way to quantify these different biases. So Dan Benjamin has a very nice survey where he, uses these regressions to kind of quantify how big is confirmation bias and things like that. And so here we kind of run these exact same regressions, interacting with whether a signal is a retraction or not. Okay. And this is also going to let us see whether we replicate stuff. So this is what we get when we do a full Grethel regression. So we have all of these different variables. So what do we take away from this? So first of all, so again, confirmation bias is saying that beliefs should move more aggressively when they're confirming your prior. So if I'm confirming your prior belief, your update should be stronger. So we find this as well. So you can see that in terms of if the signal is confirming your prior, you do update more aggressively than the other case. However, if you think about it, when you get the diminished effective retractions should move you less. Okay, so one important point that how is our design able to distinguish confirmation bias versus updating from retractions? It's because if you get two yellow signals and then a blue signal, if I'm retracting the blue signal, then that's actually favorable for your prior. Okay, so in that kind of history, confirmation bias is saying you should update more, but our effect is saying that you should update less. And you can actually see if you just add these, you can see that the interaction with whether something's a retraction is actually larger than the effect of confirmation bias. So if you get a signal that is confirming your prior, your beliefs are actually not moving by as much. So whereas confirmation bias says you should update more. In our case, you're actually you're updating less. And so that's actually something that's inconsistent with just misinterpreting how informative the signals are. Okay, so we find base rate neglect as well. People underweight the prior. Overall, we don't find conservatism, so that's maybe a little surprising given some of these earlier patterns. However, I'll point out that these estimates are quite close to what Augenblick, Lazarus, and Thaler find. And we use sort of in terms of they have more different parameters than we do, but they're not looking at retractions, they're just looking at inference from signals themselves. And so they obtain very similar results, and they kind of identify this like 0.6, 0.4 information structure as around the boundary between where you get overreaction and underreaction. So these results are in fact kind of similar to what we would get. Okay, so good. So what we have here is a precise illustration of continued influence, and now I want to talk a little bit about the complexity channel. And so the idea that we have is that updating from retractions involves added complexity. Now, why is it that retractions should have more complexity? So this is not a new idea. It turns out if you kind of write things very carefully, then you can see that the particular pattern that we find is actually kind of a special instance of other probabilistic reasoning errors that have been seen in the literature. So what I have here is a graphical model representation of a new draw. Okay, so all I've done, if you haven't seen graphical models, it's exactly what it looks like. I don't think there's anything kind of fancy or special. It's just I have these different variables that are circled, and then I have an arrow from one variable to the other if there's a causal influence. So here, if I let theta be the truth ball color, well, what the color of the truth ball is going to influence the signal that you see, okay, as well as whether you're seeing a noise ball or not. That will also be something that influences what you see. This epsilon, that's just something I need to make this kind of complete, okay, to kind of completely determine the signal. I need all of these three variables, but for the most part, I want you to focus on the relationship between the state, whether something's a truth ball, and whether that signal that you see is noise. And you'll see that, once you kind of write this out, I think it's very clear, hopefully, that the signal that you see is directly related to the state, that there's a direct relationship between the signal, whether something is yellow, whether a draw is yellow or blue, and the truth ball color, whether the truth ball is yellow or blue. These are directly related to one another. Now, if I give you a retraction, I'm actually not providing you information about the state, but I'm providing information about the noise status, okay? And the point is that the noise status and the truth ball color are independent. These are independent variables. If the probability that you get see the truth ball versus you see a noise ball is always going to be 1/5 versus 4/5, right? That's these probabilities, the probabilities of the different kinds of balls doesn't depend on what the color of the truth ball is. Okay, so these are independent variables, but they become dependent when you condition on the color of the draw. So if I condition on you having seen a yellow ball, then that's going to then these different variables become conditionally dependent. That introduces dependence. So the point is that when I condition on this intermediate variable, this is called a collider in the graphical models literature. Kind of conditioning on colliders introduces conditional dependence. And Pearl and McKenzie, so this is kind of a popular book. They point out this exact structure. They kind of tie this to a number of different biases like that. Or a number of different mistakes, I should say, that are made in the literature. So this kind of conditioning, the fact that independent variables become dependent when I condition on colliders, that's something that can generate a lot of different kinds of errors. One of them is the Monty-Hall problem. That one particularly, so Pearl and McKenzie talked about the Monty-Hall problem. If you're not familiar with it, don't worry about it. It's not going to play a role for anything else I want to talk about. But that is also something that has been, discussed by Miller and Sanjuro. As it's a similar kind of issue. The fact that you have this like selection that happens, and that kind of can lead, and that people often make that kind of mistake. So that we're not pointing out that we're pointing out that this applies to retractions. And the interesting thing is that the fact that they're different doesn't necessarily imply that we would see this difference in our experiment. And so what we want to do next is look for these different complexity measures and show that they are in fact higher for retractions. So we have 3 different measures that we look at. The first is the response time. So we ask how long does it take for you to make your report? The idea being if it takes you longer, then that reflects more thinking, and that should involve more complexity. The second we look at is the variance in the belief reports, the idea being that if your belief reports have a lot of variance, that should imply more uncertainty, and that might also reflect more complexity. And the last one is how correct are you? So we have these Bayesian probabilities. We can ask how far away are you from the truth? The idea being that if you're kind of farther off, then that should suggest more complexity. So more further from the truth means that your answers are more misleading, and that should mean more complexity. So most of these are pretty straightforward how we would find them. The one that's maybe not is this belief variance. And so for that, we use the fact that we see, sometimes subjects will see the same history multiple times. And so we compute the subjects' variance in their belief reports. When we're kind of forming this estimate, what is the belief variance that a given history? Okay, so now I can do the same thing and see how do these variables change across the treatments. And we find that the complexity, all of these complexity measures are higher for retraction. So in both treatments, subjects are further from the truth. That means that they're doing worse for retractions on average. This was not obvious at all, because you could have thought that maybe these biases are canceling out, and actually maybe that it's actually helpful to have, maybe it's actually easier to have the retraction because it helps me overcome my other biases. This is saying no, that's not happening. It's taking them longer to look at to reply. If we look at the log decision time, it's taking 6% longer compared to what what they reported in the initial signal, and 8% for the new draws, and the standard deviation. The variance in the belief report is also higher.
Sure. Jonathan,
Yeah.
maybe again I'm misunderstanding something, but what I'm having a hard time seeing why it's complex in this paradigm. Why don't I just say, oh, it's a noisy ball, I should ignore that. Let me go back to what I would have believed had I not seen that ball. Like, why is that? In what sense is that complex?
The formal sense is this kind of that's sort of why we have this kind of indirect updating idea that if I'm kind of telling you about, if I'm asking you to interpret a noise ball, I'm telling you that one of the last draws you saw was noise, then and that's not directly related to the state, but I'm asking you about the state, right? And so the fact that there's this indirect connection versus the direct connection, that's sort of what we're saying is the
But cognitively, why don't I just think about that as, oh, that ball has no information.
yeah, that's how you should. I mean, that's absolutely how they
But
should.
that doesn't seem like a complex way to right. Then there'd be no added complexity, right?
Yeah, and then they would update exactly.
Right.
So the point is that we are seeing that's why we are using these revealed complexity measures, right? To try to see like what is the data telling us about how complex they are. Let's use
So,
these
but the
measures.
complexity is coming from the fact that they're just like not thinking about this properly. Because because it just seems to me like retractions can be a complex thing to think about, but in this setting, they're really not, unless you're not understanding the task.
Can we postpone this maybe to the Q&A because we are at time?
Yeah.
Okay.
I will let Jonathan
Yeah, so let me
conclude.
okay, so this is kind of visualizing everything. The decision time estimates are kind of different between mTurk and prolific. The other ones are not. The one thing, so let me just point out, we do this within design variation where we look at the last draw versus not the last draw. I sort of mentioned this earlier, and for this we find decreased we find that actually subjects do much better for updating from the when they are retracting the last draw. So maybe this is also an answer to Moshe's question, because it's true that if I'm retracting the last draw, then yes, you don't have, then it's just you just forget about what you've seen, right? And that's our idea, is that setting should be less, that problem should be very much less complex, and we actually see that they do better in those cases. If I'm retracting the first ball you saw, there's nothing for you to go back to. So it's kind of, in that case, I can't really just say, oh yeah, let me give you a belief report for a history I've never seen before. And so in those cases, it's not just, oh yeah, forget that you've seen this. It's actually, no, I have to think, well, what would my beliefs had I never seen this? And that's not something that's sort of where this added complexity is coming from. Okay, so like I said, I'm at time. We ran a ton of other variations. We didn't elicit intermediate beliefs. We wrote that we told them that the noise ball is not informative about the color of the truth ball, and that they should ignore it, that they've seen it whenever we retracted something. We didn't, we kind of played with what we showed them. We had a noisy version. We had a lot of different versions, but I'm out of time. I'm happy to talk about the other versions we did. And I already talked about kind of, okay, if we cut out subjects based on misinterpretation, then that's then we don't get then we get even stronger results, if anything. When we do kind of within subject analysis, we find 70% of subjects display this kind of less updating from retractions. The last thing I want to emphasize, so I also said this earlier as well, but we asked subjects kind of how confident are they in the report in the fourth experiment. We didn't think about doing it earlier, but for the fourth one, we actually had them say we basically followed the Libgober. So this was another paper where that was sort of about these confidence elicitations more directly. And so we actually asked them, like, how confident are you in your report? And we actually found like almost no difference. It's like one point lower, and almost a kind of in terms of confidence, we actually find that it's almost indistinguishable for retractions versus new draws. And so that's sort of telling us that subjects, and the kind of coming back to this earlier point, that actually this is not, subjects aren't perceiving retractions as differently as perhaps they should. So the evidence that we have is that actually subjects kind of perceive them as kind of normal and easy and simple, and don't quite get at that they're actually getting it more wronger. And so we have a lot of other analysis at that. That's some of the, but again, this is sort of that's kind of maybe the newest part that we're still working on. So that's what I have. Like I said, I'm a little over time. I'll maybe leave the conclusion slide up for the discussion, but just thanks so much.
Thank you very much, Jonathan.